Hello and welcome to the RSnake Show Demo Day. Today we have BigID. As you might be aware, we have Trey Ford with us, the newly minted CISO of BugCrowd. So congratulations to Trey. And we also have Dimitri and Chris with us. So why don't you guys take it away?
Well, thank you very much, Robert, and congratulations, Trey, on the new gig. So my name is Dimitri Sirota. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of BigID. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Chris Hosley, one of the directors for Security Solution Engineering for BigID.
Great.
Sure.
Well, why
So
don't you guys just jump in? Yeah, it doesn't sound like you guys have a slide deck, so even better.
yeah, okay, sure. So terrific. So why don't we kind of just walk the audience kind of through what BigID does and where we kind of fit. So BigID started, we started selling back in 2018. We're today about 600 people. I happen to be in Miami. Chris is somewhere in Wisconsin with seemingly a poor internet connection. But we're kind of spread around the world, and I spend a lot of my time internationally as well. The company got its start focusing on data security and compliance. That's still what we are today, a platform, kind of a next generation, reimagined, AI-powered, cloud-native data security and compliance. We have hundreds of customers, mostly focused on enterprise, over 100 million. So we're both a unicorn and a centaur. If you're familiar with those definitions of being a Cloud 100 company for several years, Inc. 1000 for 4 years running, Deloitte 500 for 4 years running, et cetera. What we're going to show you today is what we describe as our cloud data security platform. So we do a lot of things in security. We do insider risk. We do AI data kind of prep. We do privacy. We do a lot of things, but what we've kind of designed over the few years we've been in business is really this kind of next generation platform that starts with a data identification classification. So being able to locate your data in hundreds of different data sources in the cloud, like public cloud, SaaS, dev cloud, even on premise and in the hybrid cloud, I guess they call it now. And then being able to identify the data either out of the box or with bespoke classifications. And then being able to do something with that information, whether it's remediation, whether it's data retention, whether it's layering and access controls or so forth. Recently, in the last couple of years, folks have kind of started naming this data security posture management. We think that kind of fits part of it. It doesn't fit all of what we do, in whether it covers DLP or DAG, or all those 3 and 4 letter acronyms you read about every so often. But we're going to cover a little bit about how we help organizations get very quick visibility into where they have high risk, high value data, and then how we help them take action on that data. So maybe Chris, do you want to kind of walk the audience through kind of what we're going to show them today?
Absolutely. So when we think about BigID, the concept here, right, is when we're working across the entire ecosystem for a customer, we have to get started. We have to discover all of that data, and we have to classify that information. So everything for us is done in quick and easy to use auto discovery processes, as well as quick and easy classifications. When we're talking about that, we're talking about the idea that no matter where the data sits, cloud, on-prem, structured, semi-structured, unstructured, business applications, whatever it is, even email, collaboration tools, we want to be able to automatically onboard any data source that sits out there for quick and easy processing of that information. So we do that in a number of manners, right? The concept here is that across the entire cloud ecosystem, AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform, as well as some of the NetApp ONTAP solutions, we can connect into those with a single account. We tie into all of the major vaulting solutions, CyberArk, HashiCorp, Thycotic, BeyondTrust, whatever it is, read-only service accounts, connect in, and automatically, from that point moving forward, discover every single data repository that stands up in those cloud areas. On top of that, we're also able to connect into over 160 additional data sources throughout. I'm going to slow scroll this one just to discuss the concept that it doesn't matter where the data is, from mainframes to vector databases for your AI usage, we've got you covered throughout. The concept, as we said, no matter where it is, read-only service accounts, look through, discover that information, and once it's ready to go, we'll start classifying it uniformly across all of those. So you have a full registry of information that we can start working with you on.
Okay, great. Is it? Can we
ahead.
start asking
Yeah.
some questions here?
Absolutely. Wide open.
Yeah, I was. Yeah. So who tends to be the sort of the worst offenders who need this the most? You know, I mean, I'm sure everybody who has any cloud presence is going to need some of this, but who is sort of like coming to you just like frantically trying to
Sure.
solve this problem?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I could take that, and Chris, you feel free to add.
Yep.
So look, we historically have catered to larger enterprises, not just Fortune 500, maybe kind of the global 2000. So certainly them. A lot of them have regulated data. It could be regulated based on Graham-Leachy, could be Sarbanes-Oxley, could be HIPAA, could be PCI, could be privacy regulations like GDPR and CPRA. There are hundreds, could be export control regulations, et cetera. On top of that, look, nobody wants to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, right? With a headline talking about that they had a major breach. People lose their jobs for those kind of things. So wherever there's high value data, I think organizations of almost any sort are worried about exfiltration of that data, about employees, the insider risk issue where employees may go to a competitor with that data. They care about compliance with the regulations, like the examples I gave. They also care about compliance with controls. Like NIST has a new cloud control, OWASP has a cloud control, EDM Council. There's a number of them as well. So I think this idea that data is kind of at the center of the digital enterprise, the currency of the digital enterprise, if you will, and that data represents both value, right? This is how you get personalization. This is how you get BI. This is how you get AI, but it also has risk. And so I would kind of say it's a very large remit. And then within the enterprise, it's a couple of stakeholders, certainly security, which is the background that I have and Chris has, is one. Security typically has people that care about cloud security, data security, security architecture and preparation for AI. The data organization, they're trying to extract value. They're trying to, look for that Glenn Ross data that drives value. So they care about it. And then I would also say privacy and compliance folks who are tasked with conforming with whether it's CPRA or CCPA or some of these other regulations. They also care about that in these enterprises we talk to.
Got it.
I would add just a little bit there, right? It is organizations that have been trying to do this for the last 10 to 20 years, and they've been doing it with disparate sets of products and trying to make it all come together. It's always that gamble, starting off with DLP, moving into pinpoint solutions that are designed to help with one of those areas that Dimitri just listed off. And they're coming back around saying, it hasn't worked. It's been this ongoing project. We're trying to get to this conclusion. We need to make better decisions at the end of the day. So wrapped up in everything that Dimitri just said, it's those organizations that have been trying to get this done for an incredibly long period of time.
I'm going to go back and push on something that was stated pretty early. So data classification, data identification, you all do that natively. One of the greatest challenges I think we wrestled with the DLP revolution was fingerprinting. You can identify a credit card number. You can identify account numbers, driver's license numbers, social security numbers. Those things are highly structured, pretty easy to pick apart. I imagine LLMs and other modern AI architectures have made making sense of different data, classifying data a lot easier. How are y'all approaching this? How are you identifying and scoring data sets?
Sure. Let me maybe kind of start, and then Chris, you can kind of weigh in a little bit. So LLMs have and have not. So remember, most LLMs are not pre-trained on sensitive data. They're not pre-trained on commercial data at all. They're pre-trained on screen scrapes from websites and from like Reddit posts and from Twitter. So they don't natively necessarily know beyond just kind of like what the structure is of a credit card, but they don't even necessarily know some of the requirements around BIN numbers and so forth. I would say it's a mix of technologies. So we have about 6 or 7 patents using various kinds of AIs, from graph to NLP to deep learning, to random forest, to other types of things. And it depends on what you want to do. If you want to be able to watermark code, we use one kind of AI. If you want to be able to look at strings of text in JSON, we use a different type of AI. If you want to be able to categorize a document as a mortgage origination document, it's again a different. So we use a variety of means, and in fact, very recently, we were just named. Intuit ran the first competition around data identification and classification. They brought in 20 DSPM and DLP vendors from the Bay Area and Israel, and we came out on top. And they provided a very mix of kind of signatures and data. It was complicated, and I think what we realize is there's no one size fits all, and there's always some focus on being able to do things easily, like the easy button out of the box, the ability to tailor. So if you're looking for passwords and credentials as an example, you'll want to be able to tune out things like maybe for Zoom, right? Maybe you don't care about a passcode for Zoom after the Zoom is expired, right? It doesn't have a lot of value. But a privileged password for a database or a service account for a cloud, that's hugely valuable. So you want to be able to kind of focus on that. So we've developed, I would say, more than any other vendor in the DLP, DSPM, DAM space, a set of IP to both identify data and signature the data, to do it accurately, so with a kind of low false positive rate. We also have the ability to countervailant or to also show you a low false negative, because some customers that we have don't just want accuracy around a set of data sets. They also want to find everything, right? So for instance, in privacy, I want to find every fragment that could represent either PII, uniquely identifiable data, or PI, contextually identifiable. So we've just developed it, and then we've kind of packaged it in a way that you could get started quickly. And then just like a onion, which I'm not sure how much of your audience is familiar with, but you could basically unpack more. You could basically peel it and say, hey, wait a second, I want to be able to also categorize these documents, or I want to be able to exclude certain types of data in my in my credential lookup for ransomware protection. And so that's what we've developed. Chris, anything from you?
Yeah, I mean, we're breaking it down at a data attribute level, right? It's not just simply saying meet this set of criterias that were created by something outside of the realm of possible, right? We're saying actually, let's go look and let's find all of the data, and then as Dimitri pointed out, right, let's package it up the way that you need to see it. And every organization is so unique, right? They have their own member ID, they have their own customer ID, they have whatever it is, on top of the information that matters within the compliance realm or within the privacy realm. The concept, right, is that once you've broken down the data completely, you can then put it back together in a way that they need to see it, and then get it to where the individuals that want to work with the data can actually do that, right? So the concept is that eventually you have an entire inventory of the information, you have a registry of the information from a cataloging perspective, and everything is actually done at an entity-based level. So when somebody says, I need to understand more about this from a security perspective, you're wrapping it up to say, well, it's not just a bunch of credit card numbers. It's the credit card numbers that contain all of the data associated with the person whose credit card it actually is. This is wildly different than just simply saying we lost a bunch of credit card numbers in the event of a breach in a security space, right? Or privacy related. Tell me everybody that lives in California. That's one thing. Tell me everybody that lives in California that was a part of this. That's a very different story. And we're answering all of those questions because we're breaking down the data in total.
So that entity capability seems to get into pseudonymized data. I'm going to fumble that one constantly. But the idea of trying, yeah, exactly, trying to de-identify and statistically meaningful levels of anonymization against those records. It sounds like you're actually able to reconstruct a lot of this and provide score, context, or impact based on that. Is that true? And how do you think about that?
So we can't. So yes and no. So so first of all, it's important for the audience to realize that pseudonymized or anonymized data usually applies more to structured data versus unstructured data. So not human generated data like a document or an email, but typically kind of things you use in spreadsheets and databases and data warehouses, things that you're going to be using for BI. We do have an ability to be able to correlate the data. So we developed some IP based on graph that we use for various use cases. Like I want to locate data that belongs to Dimitri Sirota, or I want to locate data that belongs to this particular customer. And we use that, and it works at scale super effectively. And the way that technology works, it actually score ranks various attributes. So it could follow referential integrity and basically connect different attributes together. We also have an ability to build a logic around combinations of attributes. Usually that's used for identifying toxic data, but it's also can be helpful in terms of identifying partially randomized or partially pseudonymized data. So we could look for particular attributes and include positive and negative attributes and say, I want to look for these 4 things, but I also want to make sure it excludes that. And that also could be helpful in being able to piece this story together. So we have a variety of ways, but look, if anonymization is done correctly, it should still stay anonymized. It's just
Sure.
that the reality is if all you're doing is mixing data, or again, it depends on the method, and there's lots of
Yep.
methods. Some are better than others in terms of making sure data stays
Sure.
anonymous.
Makes sense. Great answer. I'm sitting here thinking about not from even necessarily the intelligence standpoint, but I think about like the big 4 consultancies where they've got, Chinese walls separating the different entities. You've got equity firms with research versus operations versus deal origination. But if you were to sit back and say, hey, what all do we know about this organization? I think about professional service organizations that cannot reconstitute and reorganize projects, delivery, context, sales opportunities, development. Like there's no way to reconstitute that. The organizational knowledge is so fragmented, not even by design. It just happens. There's a lot of value you're probably extracting beyond just the security context.
Yeah, and look, there is. So look, part of the fulcrum of everything we do around data is not just to provide organizations a way to remediate risk, whether it's regulatory or security, but also for them to rebuild the value, right? So look, we've all kind of survived 2 years of COVID, largely living at home.
Yep.
As you could tell from my background, I still work from home in Miami. But it changed the way we work, right? And for the most part, a lot of us interact online or digitally. And so our representation in most companies is digital. It's a bunch of digital footprints, maybe an email, maybe a file, maybe a chat conversation on Slack. And so you're right. People want to piece together like, well, I want to be able to curate a data set for doing RAG for AI, right? I want to basically figure out what mortgages are. I want to figure out what a customer of this particular profile, a Gen Xer, looks like. And so we actually help. So we do cater to those data communities that are not just trying to kind of solve for risk, but also trying to elevate the value, right? So whether that's being able to extract whether this data is about Dimitri or a particular client or of a particular cohort, or just being able to set aside and say, I want data that resembles the following because I want to do some training. I want to take a commercial LLM model and I want to be able to enrich it with my company's data. So we help all that. So we kind of look at the world from this two lens kind of bifurcation around how do we help organizations figure out value, but then how do we also make sure that we can deliver the value while diminishing the risk?
Love it. Robert, my questions from here are going to start drilling into architecture and implementation and operating models.
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go too. So, why don't we step through like an example? Like, let's say someone you mentioned before had a breach. Like, how might I drill in and find information about what would be in scope for said breach?
So the concept there is that once the data has obviously been classified through BigID, we're connected to everything that's sitting out here. There's actually going to be 2 ways that most organizations are working with us to investigate a breach, but also to try to preemptively understand where a breach may actually occur. So in order to investigate, you effectively go to the inventory for us, and you'll actually see everything that's sitting out here. Now the data is actually broken down in a manner from an entity perspective. As you can see at the top here, you can see how many general entities we have spread across the entire ecosystem, whether that's, as you can see here, sitting inside of an old network file share, maybe an old chatbot model from an old dev person, maybe sitting off in your data platform, whatever it looks like. Selecting any of these resets the entire understanding of what's actually out there. We now know that if an old network file share per se were to be captured, maybe breached, blocked up by a breach that's sitting out there, 435,000 individual entities reside in that area. This whole thing is actually able to be exported and sent off via APIs or general exports. You can understand it broken down across the entire entity structure, sitting down here to see where do they reside, how many points of record, the level of risk associated with that, if any of that information were then to be used inside of the ecosystem. So if it was a low and slow land and expand type of a breach, how many other places could that data have existed, especially if they weren't following our general security practices? This would be in response in the event that a breach has already occurred. Here's where we're going to step in and be able to answer that question.
And
now,
I think if I could maybe just double down a little bit or double click. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna add a little bit. So I think the way our customers use us typically is both in the before and the after, which sounds very, very heavenly and very epistemological. But they typically try and prevent, obviously, a breach. So sometimes it's by looking for loose credentials or passwords to be able to diminish them. Sometimes they just want to find sensitive data. Sometimes they want to find data that has excessive privileges, excessive access privileges. So they look at BigID as a preventative tool to make sure that they don't have, again, data crossing boundaries, data that has overprivileged access, data that has unusual access, passwords floating around. But I think what Chris is also highlighting is that BigID is used more commonly now in the post, in the hereafter. I had an incident. I need to investigate the incident. And one of the unique things about BigID, even among the DSPM and DLP vendors, is we could give you an exact view of your data, not just an assessment or a sample view, but an exact view. And this is why that's important. If you want to piece together what data came from where, right, that impact analysis, being able to say, look, I already have a fingerprint or a map of where my data is. I want to be able to figure out, did it come from this file server, from this data lake or bucket? We could do that. We could not just tell you what data came from there, but who as an individual with what residency came from there as well. So we have a lot of our clients, obviously names won't be shared, who use us to basically determine materiality of an impact or of a breach, where they typically have a weekend or 4 days to report to the SEC. Is this something that I need to investigate further? Was this material? Was this significant? And that's actually a very clear-cut requirement under the new SEC rules. And so we do have quite a few folks that use our ability to measure the impact crater, if you will, of an incident. And so again, now we have the kind of two bookends where customers use us historically for preventing these incidents, but in the hopefully small likelihood that something does occur, they can now use a tool like BigID to very quickly assess what was taken and whose data was taken, and that helps with SEC requirements plus state breach regulations.
Well, let's just be real with one another. Every one of those companies is compromised basically all the time. So I think that has huge implications for the teams internally if they're doing their job to have a tool like that. But I was also kind of curious. I mean, we have weird situations like conflicts popping up, and suddenly there's a whole bunch of machines that are in a geo, let's say, that you maybe can't trust anymore. Like maybe they're trustworthy a week ago, but not today. So like, it's not exactly a breach in the traditional sense, but you still can't rely on it, and you still need to know where the threats might lie. Like, how do you kind of segment that out? What would be the process for understanding that?
So look, I think that's a classic kind of zero trust scenario where, to some degree, all of these devices need to be considered with a modicum of trust or no trust whatsoever. And so it's kind of almost this kind of notion of trust but verify. So whether it's an individual behind the device manning it like a laptop, or whether it's an unattended device, or whether it's even a large language model, right, or an agent representing that model in this new agentic world, you need to look for unusual activity. So it's not enough to be able to say, I already approved this. This is a permissible identity, whether it's a human or a machine, and they have access to the following resources. So we could do that. But let's assume that they already have the legitimate permission. They're part of the right group. They're part of the right account profile. They're part of the right role. you still want to be able to monitor them and look for particular unusual activities, violations of policies, deviations from baselines, things of that sort. So to some degree, it's kind of like a trust but verify. So even if you approve them based on their role or group or other kind of membership definition, you still want to be able to monitor their activity and make determinations as to whether they're deviating from the norm. And so we do that as well.
Got it. Yeah, so why don't we dig into some of the stuff you can do on the more preventative side in that case?
Yeah, so on the preventative stuff, why don't we kind of talk a little bit about Chris, if you don't mind, kind of the finding, the mapping, and then talk a little bit about remediation, retention, labeling, et cetera.
Absolutely. So the concept, right, is that from a preventative standpoint, you've done the discovery and classification. So why not understand where the risk actually does reside and present it in a way that it actually can be ingested and then ultimately built into a series of workflows as well as what you've already invested in. We call it security posture. It's just a part of our standardized platform, but basically we're taking the data and using it in a way that makes sense for you to actually see where the risk resides. So the concept would be just show me where all the passwords reside or the highly accessible information as it sits inside of the entire ecosystem. Tokens, keys, and secrets for all of the repositories. Whatever it is, we'll actually let you know how it has spread across the entire ecosystem. So something like, let's just say passwords, for example, you're fine if it's sitting inside of a SQL table. That's where it should reside. Should it be encrypted? Yes, but it's there, right? We discovered it. You can say, yep, go to the DBA team. Why is it showing up in Confluence, a collaboration utility? Why is it showing up inside of vector databases for your AI utilities? An old school Microsoft SMB drive. There's zero reason. And now you're looking at this saying, this is exactly what we've been trying to figure out. What is the level of risk associated with just how the business has ran? There probably was zero malintent in these situations. It's just simply how the data has evolved across the corporate landscape for almost every major organization. I can't say that we work with any one customer
or maybe it's
or
just like a
prospective customer.
backup somewhere, maybe?
Just a backup somewhere, exactly, right? Or the classic migration of in a Microsoft shop, moving from, let's just say, your old school home drives, and now all of a sudden they make their way to OneDrive. And now it's easily accessible for anybody that you choose to, or Teams.
Yeah, but just to be clear, one thing you got to remember is take credentials for example. If you're a support organization, you pass around passwords to get into customers' environments all the time. You do it over Teams. If you're a developer, you sometimes hard code API keys or service accounts to get access to infrastructure. So you'll find it in Jira. You'll find it as an attachment in ServiceNow. These credentials, the examples that Chris is talking about, could find themselves everywhere, right? Flat files, structured databases, chat windows, both private and public chats, collaboration tools like OneDrive, everywhere, you name it. And our customers want to be able to look everywhere, whether it's Confluence, whether it's a Jira, whether it's a ServiceNow, whether it's a code repo like GitHub or GitLab. You want to be able to look everywhere because it just takes one loose password that bad actor kind of thieves. And from there, they could basically get access to everything.
Got it.
The concept at that point, right, is that you've identified it, you've discovered where it sits. And again, probably through no malintent in any way. It just simply is the evolution of data. And now you see that it's sitting out in these locations. Well, you've either already invested in a process, you've got it signed off on by the executive suite, and you're working with that, or you need the ability to start developing one. Well, luckily, we kind of step in there and cover both sides of that puzzle in the sense that you can see here, there's just passwords discovered inside of a vector database. We're making it look incredibly easy, obviously. It's not. It's definitely very difficult to do. But when you look at this, you now have options for what you'd like to do in these situations. If you've already built a flow for your teams to take a look at, maybe it's an AI governance team, maybe it's a security team, maybe it's just a random team out there that actually wants to understand how data is moving around. Tie that into your ticketing solution. That's quick and easy to do. And I think almost every organization that has anything should be able to handle it with ServiceNow or Jira or any of those others that are sitting out there. On top of that, though, you can also send it to a SOAR solution. the Palo Alto Cortexes of the world, the Torques of the world, you can basically kick off a playbook right from here, including all of the context that we've been able to gather. So what was the violation? Are there remediation steps associated with this in the fact that maybe data made its way here because of an ingestion process that wasn't controlled? Should we consider changing out permissions? If it allows for us and we're able to actually gather the permissions as well, we'll gather those permissions and let you know you've elevated privileges in something like a OneDrive or a SharePoint Online. And you probably should think about either revoking that access using BigID or your built-in process. We actually allow ourselves to do that in that there are some things that are just hypercritical that should be addressed right here on the spot. And again, I'm going to say it, it's probably the overarching theme here. It can all be done automatically behind the scenes or through APIs, in the sense that the entire user interface can just be actioned right here with an API as well.
So how do you know what
Any questions there? Yeah.
the utility of any one given password is? I mean, how do you say this password can be used here, here, and here, and here, as opposed to just live in those places? Or, it's like, just because I have a password on a OneDrive somewhere, it's not necessarily obvious at first blush where it would be useful. So how do you get to that sort of final determination?
So let me grab that. So generally speaking, you could figure out the potential risk around the password based on the format of the password. You could also use some environmental variables to assess the potential impact, right? Is the password described in a particular context? And then largely where it's at, right? If a password is in a particularly vulnerable spot, like an S3 bucket that's open to partners and other consumers, then it represents high risk. So I think you could start off by just figuring out what kind, is it a privileged password to a database? Is it a service account to my entire cloud infrastructure? Or is it a passcode to my Zoom? Those have differences of severity. Do I find it in a resource that's segmented, like a Bitbucket that's within a private on-premise domain, or do I find it in a SaaS application that is only protected through a customer password? So where it's located is also very important. And then again, you could ascribe different risks to that. And then largely, you could also kind of start streamlining by, what is the context of the discovery? Is it part of an epic that I have in Confluence? So that any developer I hire or potentially fire would have access to that and would understand the context of it as part of my application architecture. So there's all these things you could do to essentially prioritize. And then what happens is you could either kind of remediate that centrally through a SOC or decentrally where you push it out to that application owner. So I'm responsible for Confluence and I want to basically push out to the various project teams responsibility, and then you can kind of track that. So we support both models, but the idea is to look everywhere, prioritize based on risk, and that risk could take on a few forms, and then find a scalable way to push responsibility for taking action as well as accountability around that action out to the people that have kind of the most access and the most control to those particular epics and stories and chats, public or private, etc.
Robert, I want to take a left turn and go in a slightly different direction for a quick second. So we've got a platform that can identify passwords, secrets, score different types of data sets, access all of my data stores. It'll identify passwords, secrets, other credentials, and it's going to have access to everything. This reminds me of the old hacker axiom, why hack one bank when I could hack all the banks at the same time, right? What is your implementation model? Where does this live? How are you securing one tenant's data from everyone else's? Can you talk to me a little bit about how you think about that, how you're implemented, how my company's data and access in your platform is protected?
Sure, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah. So absolutely, the entire platform itself is containerized architecture as a whole, right? It's designed to be scaled out and up across any organization as we work. Now, that being said, we're only ever working with the data where it resides using a piece of technology called scanning technology, or a scanner as a whole. The concept is that you put that as close to the data as possible, and that data itself only maintains between that scanner and where it resides as a whole using that read-only service account. It's never transversing back to BigID in any way. It's a SaaS platform as a whole. It can be deployed in our cloud or within a customer's cloud, depending on how obviously they need to have this. We're PCI certified across the board. We support all of the major key services providers that are sitting out there. But again, when we're looking at the metadata as a whole, we see the information, we gather what's there, and then only the metadata is making its way back to BigID. So when you're looking at our screen, you see password. It is literally just that there's a password there. It's not the actual password itself. We're not making a copy of the data ever. The concept is always that you should never be duplicating the data. That's just a strict security policy for any good organization. And then on top of that, when we're working with that data, again, it's treating it as a simple read-only service account. We're not locking the information. We're not preventing anybody from working with that information. And the end goal is always that the end user safety and overall experience is always in mind when we're working with that data as a whole. So always deployed, cloud, using a containerized architecture, never making a copy of the data, always keeping security top of mind, working within all of the confines. That's why we're all of the certifications that are sitting out there, PCI, ISO 27001,
Sure.
all of the great ones that are sitting there, SOC 2, yeah.
That makes sense. Let me play this back because I don't know that I'm fully satisfied yet. That's a great start to the answer. So my implementation of BigID runs in a container. You use read-only tokens to get access to my environment. You run some scanner technology that is crawling and inventorying and providing some sort of metadata, mathematical representation of what it's been exposed to, giving a high resolution picture of what lives in each of these source destinations. And so none of that's transversing the environment. How is my data isolated? What's that tenancy model look like? Do I have my own container that runs in my environment, my own implementation? Like, paint that picture for me.
Could I correct a couple things first
Please,
off?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we don't actually crawl. We're not Google. We're not crawling.
Sure,
your,
I'm
your
sorry.
environment.
I'm using a particular term. Yeah, clarify.
Yeah.
Please.
So let me kind of just talk a little bit about the typical deployment. So first off, 90% of our customers deploy us as a multi-tenant SaaS,
Okay.
and that we have a standard SaaS, and then for a small kind of uptick, you could deploy in one of 28 countries. So if you're like in Germany or in Japan or so forth, you could have kind of a local SaaS. On top of that, for companies who want more isolation, so they don't like the multi-tenancy thing, which is the default, we have a more premium offering around single-tenant cloud. And so basically, those customers essentially have full isolation. We still manage the back end, but they get everything to themselves. But they pay a very small, very, very inexpensive premium.
Sure.
And then for those who deem that still insufficient in terms of security, we have what we call bring your own cloud, which essentially allows them to deploy it in their own VPC, or like in places like Saudi Arabia, maybe G42, these kind of private cloud infrastructures, or maybe in China, in Alibaba or something like that. So we support all three, and it's the exact same product. There's no difference. Now, most companies don't want to backhaul anything to our cloud whatsoever. So they have basically a local kind of scanner or network or an outpost. I think that's what the term Wiz uses.
Yep.
That kind of sits in their environment, in their network. Ours could be deployed either using Kubernetes or could be entirely cloud native, meaning there's no infrastructure you have to set up. It's spun up when it's needed and then spun down when it's not needed. We support both modes. There's difference. That local client or scanner, however you want to characterize it, speaks to each of the data sources using their native protocol. So there's no agent you instrument on any of the systems. It basically talks to them. Why does it do that? So with this local outpost, everything is kept within the customer's confines. The only thing that's brought back to our cloud or the customer's cloud, depending on whether they go with the bring your own or the BigID, is essentially a map of the data. Think of it as a GPS for your data. Now, all that information in terms of location is tokenized and salted. And then there's a little bit of encrypted metadata, but nothing about your data. The data itself is not brought over. The data itself is kind of kept local to you and it's never leaving your organization. And that's for a whole host of reasons, privacy reasons, data processor reasons, et cetera.
Sure.
But there's this kind of manifestation, this kind of map, this virtual view, just like when you're driving with GPS, it's not the world, but it gives you a view of the world, a lens into the world. And that's kind of BigID in a nutshell. The data, whether it's SMB, OneDrive, SharePoint, is all there. Snowflake, Yellowbricks, whatever. SaaS, and it never really comes to us. We just basically get a rendering of the location. One thing I will add, though, that's important, that I think is overlooked sometimes. All of the vendors in the space could scan with different levels of detail, right? So most DSPM vendors do what's called assessment scanning. Basically, they find a couple of examples and they skip to the next. So they just give you a contour view, yes or no. Do I have this kind of data? Other solutions give you a sample view where, let's say you want to prioritize, I have 25,000 S3 buckets and I want to prioritize which has the highest concentration of a certain data. You need to do a sample. So this way you could basically compare them one to the other, which you cannot do with an assessment. And then lastly, you may want to do a full scan. So some products like Varonis, Microsoft could also give you a full scan, but those take a long time and they give you a complete picture. One thing we did is we did all of the above. So you could start with very contour, either metadata or assessment, go into more details. So you could prioritize and compare, do a full scan on just those buckets or databases where you want to have a complete picture and you don't want to miss anything, maybe for regulatory reasons. And then one last thing that we've also added for our customers is once you've done that baseline scan, you could just do a maintenance scan. So now you look for changes in schemas, changes in files, changes in folders, and only rescan those changes. And the nice thing about that is it is incredibly efficient and less taxing from an infrastructure and a compute standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, yeah.
Awesome. I just was reflecting on the notion that I've got this partner, BigID, that can read all of my things. And how do I sleep at night knowing I've given the master key?
Yeah. So actually, let me talk about that as well. By the way, my cat just came. We just got a little kitten. So, yeah.
Cute.
Just crawled up. We now have a whole a bunch of animals here. So it's a great question. So look, so BigID always has a default that is read only, so we don't require it. We also allow you to segment, which is why we have kind of the password vaulting infrastructure, so that basically you could say, look, I just want to have this the privileges stored inside of another vault, and basically they can be lifecycled and so forth. On top of that, BigID provides a bunch of other controls from a security standpoint to essentially avoid those use cases. So for instance, in the scenario where you want to be able to provide a service account, like use IAM roles, cloud IAM roles, BigID actually co-developed with AWS something we now have a patent filing around to essentially allow you a much more narrow view. So we essentially create a temporary account that we have no access to, but specifically to avoid those situations, which are actually very common in the DSPM space, where you're giving the vendor essentially elevated privileges to be able, like administrative privileges, to be able to access your files or your structured databases. That's obviously a no-no on so many levels. Sure. And so we've gone through a variety of means, depending on exactly what you want, to be able to create more narrowcast permissions, but also to create these kind of proxy accounts that essentially block BigID from doing anything directly. And so there's a variety of things, and that's why we support some of these, government and financial and highly regulated industries, because we have kind of gone through that extra effort around limiting the permissions while still getting some of the benefits around the visibility.
That's a great answer. I appreciate you drilling into that, and thank you for your patience with me using terrible words like scanning or crawling. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question I tend to ask people that I think would be useful in this particular conversation is how you integrate with MSSPs, or do you work with MSSPs? Because this seems like it'd be kind of hard to both have them have access and not have access, and you have access and not have access, or whatever. Like, how does that multi-tenancy sort of thing work? And
so great question. So today we do what I kind of mentioned with kind of BigID operating that, now with a couple of exceptions. So I just came back from Brazil last week. I was in Brazil and Argentina, where we have maybe about 20 people and a bunch, over 100 customers now. We have MSPs down there. We're rolling out MSPs. So we have an MSP architecture we've developed We're rolling it out in some of the regions, I would say peripheral regions. So in Asia, Latin America, we are considering rolling it out in the US to target more commercial customers. It's not rolled out yet, but it is, but we have the architecture already built. So it'd be another mode that we would offer where you would still get some of the multi-tenancy. So it's an architecture we support in the product natively and have like since inception. We've rolled it out in some of the regions where MSPs are more important, and there's more commercial customers than there are large enterprise customers. You will probably see in 2025 we roll it out worldwide. So stay tuned. Watch this channel. I think that's what they said. The Generation X. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Okay, please feel free to continue. Sorry about all the questions here.
Absolutely. So
yeah. So
you
yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, sounds good. So the concept,
No,
right,
you go
is
ahead.
that all right? The concept is that once you've started working with the data, you classified, you discovered, you've kept security top of mind, right? Never making that copy. You are basically presiding over everything. At this point, what you can do is, as we said, is remediate the data. It's not just about tell me about your problems. We already know that there's a problem. That's why you're talking to BigID. That's actually the core tendency behind the whole concept, is that it's been out here. We need to do something actually with this. At this point, what you can actually do is go out and remediate the data. You can move the data. You can tie into integrations with primary products that are sitting out there that do other actions like encryption and obfuscation and tokenization that you've probably already invested in, or you're considering make that investment. And now you can actually take what we've done, have a level of confidence as you go through those steps, and actually do that. You can also delete data as well. So if you're talking about the idea of reducing the attack surface from the idea from security's perspective, or just simply data governance and privacy controls about how much data needs to be in the sphere for them to manage, you can go through and produce retention schedules and then ultimately remediation and deletion of data as you work through that, because we have the metadata and because you can build information around the concepts for entities. So if somebody says, why are we holding this record from 1979, a customer that no longer exists? They've been sitting in our CRM system. We'd like to have them deleted, but we need to make sure that we get rid of all of their records. You're able to do that with BigID as a whole. So not just the security from the concept of those immediate prevention steps, but also from the areas of governance and privacy, you can actually come in and see the data that's meeting that criteria associated with a retention policy across the entire data landscape. So cleaning it up, ensuring that the information, if it's meeting a 7 years, it's outside of PCI compliance at this point in time, 10 years because it's beyond a specific GDPR regulation. You can now go and say, these are all the records that meet that criteria. We have not gathered any information from that area. You're now scanning across the CRM system. You're looking at all of the files that are sitting out there, all of the extracts that came from customer service. If it's a ticketing system, whatever that actually looks like, business users are able to actually come in, see the information that has been gathered that meets that criteria based upon the retention schedule, based upon the violation, based upon the policy. They can look at it from a data source or just from an open perspective and say, hey, there's that classic passwords.txt file that's sitting out here. We're pretty sure it's not even a valid password anymore, but is there anything that we need to consider? Well, it violates a lot of policies for us. It's violating all of these regular policies that are available to us. It's got a password sitting inside of it. We've scanned it years ago, but look at all these retention policies that are available to us. There's a file destruction policy. There's a general rot policy. We need to consider what to do. Let's come in here and let's actually go ahead and move that data. Let's mark it for tombstoning. Let's archive it. Let's figure out what we need to do and actually do it with BigID or tie into where we've already invested.
Interesting. So when you encrypt it, do you encrypt it in place, or do you take it offline, or like what do you do with it?
Yeah. So when we're talking about encryption, it's either tying into the Microsoft's encryption suite or a tool like maybe a Talos or something along those lines that are actually going to be in place as it resides, and then let the keys sit within that organization. Or go ahead, Dimitri.
Oh, yeah. So we work. So in the cloud, you want to be able to leverage and take advantage of the infrastructure. So like in Snowflake, for instance, we do what's called push down. Same in Databricks. So we take advantage of the local infrastructure and their capabilities. So we have the policy and we can push it down. We also integrate with third-party tools like Fortanix and Talos as well. Because we have exact location, which is unique in our industry, most companies do a very cursory assessment. Because we could actually locate, remember I talked about GPS, we know exactly where the location of the particular data is. We can also integrate with other tools that like Integrity, et cetera. And then we are adding some native capabilities for data cleansing through redaction and tokenization as well. So that's coming early in the new year. So you'll be able to have the full chain. So if you want to clean data for AI, let's say you're staging some data for doing enrichment training of a particular commercial model, you'll be able to redact that as well. So that's coming shortly.
That's cool. Okay, so I don't know where the time went. We're coming up really close on time here, but I would like to ask. I asked this question of everybody, but I think it's a good one. Is there anything about BigID that you guys would say is like so good that it either does have a cyber guarantee associated with it, a warranty, or could be because it works so well, like you put your money on it?
Yeah, so we actually get recommended. So the two largest insurance brokers, not to mention countless insurance companies, use us, and we actually won. I forget what it was called, but Marsh put out an recognized a number of vendors. I think it was called a Marsh Catalyst. So Marsh is one of the big insurance brokers, and they announced a set of vendors that they thought would actually lower their premiums. So if you use BigID, you would actually be able to get a lower premium. And we have several of the large brokerages and cyber insurance vendors as customers. But yeah, so I do think what is different about BigID? Look, I think the coverage, most of the vendors specialize on one or two data sources. Even the ones that say they do public cloud typically do like the three S's, S3, Snowflake, SQL, and the rest are kind of on your own. We do everything, native public cloud, non-native public cloud, SaaS, dev cloud, on-premise, like you name it, mainframe, we do it. And we're expert at it. We do unstructured, we do structured, we do data in motion and data in rest. So that's one thing. Classification, most vendors, say PII. We could go drill down and find exactly the kind of PII and exclude, and find the context. So we could say, okay, this is an IP address, but it's in the proximity of a session key. And so we could start basic and then go more advanced. And then I think the biggest difference of all is really just what do you do once you find the data? How do you operationalize a product like BigID, whatever the 3 or 4 letter acronym of the category? That's hard, right? So how do you not get overwhelmed with findings? So we become expert in that and actually built an application platform, just like you have on your iPhone or Android, with various modules and that are designed to basically remove the noise, but actually perform some action. Now, it could just be reporting and providing more advanced reporting and prioritization. It could be provide remediation. It could be retention. It could be deletion. It could be regulatory reporting. It could be being able to get the insights you need for data functions like data stewardship. We have these kind of snap-in Lego-like apps which are unique in our category in the data industry, whether it's security, privacy, or data governance, that sets us apart. And again, it gives organizations more ways to extract value from a solution like BigID.
I like it. Okay, so any last things you want to talk about with regard to your roadmap? Because you did mention a couple things, but anything else that people should be aware of that's coming up?
Yeah. So look, we wouldn't be a 2024 going into 2025 company if we didn't talk about kind of AI. Now, AI, and I think Trey, you talked a little bit about kind of the role of AI for data classification. Here's the little secret. Large language models have a bit of a problem when it comes to using them for data classification. One is they're large, meaning you have to copy the data to the large language model. And most of our clients don't want that. So that's one problem. B, they're expensive, they're actually slow, they're not optimized and pre-trained. So what are large language models and Gen AI good for? So we've always been a heavy user of AI. I think we have a dozen patents for various applications of AI already. So we've always been heavy users. But talking about Gen AI, we kind of see it in two roles. So Gen AI is helpful, whether it's a large language or a small language model, which you could keep locally. It's useful for a more narrow use case. It can't scan 100 petabytes. It's just not designed. You can't move 100 petabytes to you. There's exfiltration costs. Like, it's just crazy. But it can be used for things like summarization. It can be used for things like extraction of certain data. So if you want to be able to look for tables, and there's applications, if you want to be able to identify the data owner, if you want to be able to label by business semantics, so there's notions of data glossary, not just risk and sensitivity, but also business description. So we have all of that. In fact, we're launching it's part of our AI Copilot strategy. But we do that. We're the first in our category to do that. So that's kind of a huge deal in the kind of using of AI. The second piece is actually helping companies in their Gen AI journey. And there's a whole bunch of things we've added over the last couple of quarters, more that's coming out in the next couple of quarters. Everything from data categorization, so being able to curate a data set, all the way to cleansing, being able to clean that. I already hinted at some of the things like redaction and tokenization, all the way to being able to manage access, either at a prompt level, at a model level. A lot of that is in the product, but there's more coming out in the next couple of months. And then lastly, just being able to holistically understand the risk, not only from a security practitioner standpoint, but from a legal practitioner standpoint, right? So think compliance, think assessment. So we are going to have a very complete offering around helping companies on their journey, but also in the taking advantage of AI to essentially make the job of a security or data steward much easier.
Gotcha. All right. Well, this is great, guys. Can you tell us how people might be able to find you, find the company, get in touch with you guys, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so the website's super easy. It's bigid.com. I think you can actually go to a few other variations as well. So there's contact information. You could also just email info@bigid, BIGID.com. But we're available at a variety of channels like Twitter. You could DM us at secure BigID and so forth. So yeah, lots of ways. Go to bigid.com. It has a chatbot. It's got a whole bunch of ways you could communicate. Ask for a private demo. Ask for a call with Dimitri or Chris. Whatever you guys want to do. We have it all. You want to be my cat? You can be my cat.
We always want to meet the cat.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.